there's this weird disconnect between higher education pedagogies and K-12 pedagogies in the CS world, but I don't see that in the music education world. Like, there are a lot of music education professors who are like, oh, well, this pedagogical approach works really well in like the high school settings, so I'm going to model it in like even some of the graduate courses and whatnot. But in CS, like, what's weird is like there's a lot of university professors that are like, well, I'm teaching undergrads, so therefore I have to approach it entirely different than I would if it was in the K-12 realm. And while on one hand, like, yeah, it's different context, different understandings, etc., but on the other hand, like, it doesn't need to be a night and day difference. We don't have to ignore all of the K-12 research just to only focus on the university stuff.
No, that's so true. That is so true. In fact, I mean, there are people that have been fighting for active learning
Yeah.
in higher ed in CS, but it is a very hard sell, and I guess it's just again these mindsets and systemic barriers and that need to be dealt with. It is very true. I think arts education as well. And the thing is that pedagogy is often studied only at the K-12 level for a lot of things. And then they do stop studying it at the higher ed level. And that is just so unfortunate.
Well, and the fact that like active learning is still like a conversation to be had at the CS education, higher education stuff, like that is not a conversation in like the arts stuff. It's just, it's assumed you're going to do active learning. And if you're not, then people will question it.
I think there is this, what some consider a dichotomy, but it isn't. It's sort of a spectrum of, pedagogy and constructionist versus, scaffolded. It's not even an either or. It is about structuring your curriculum in a way that sort of uses the right pedagogy at the right moments. And we've all sort of come very far from thinking that just leaving kids to learn program, every kid will have learned and excelled and will have done got all the things that you want them to learn. We know that that doesn't happen. There are people that come from a very strong constructionist tradition that are paying attention to how to balance the conceptual learning, how to bring in assessment, how to bring it in different ways, but you have to attend to it. Folks like Yasmin and Debbie Fields doing the e-textiles curriculum. Active learning doesn't mean that you're not going to teach them anymore.
Yeah, that's something that I've had to reiterate when I taught music education courses at the university level, because they were so bought into the idea of constructivist or constructionist approaches that they thought that like direct instruction was the boogeyman that you had to avoid. And it's like, well, no, it's not a matter of like completely avoiding it. It's just finding ways to use it when it's appropriate and not over relying on it.
Absolutely. Of course, there's a lot of research on what should come first, whether you should precede exploration with explanation. And there's been some studies that have been. The thing about learning is that there is no one size fits all for every context. But when you're aware of these, that sequencing matters. So maybe this time I'm going to try to let them explore a little bit. Maybe it's guided exploration. And then we will talk about it and discuss it. And I will introduce the idea or whatever. Or you can say, I'm going to give them just a little bit of this, and now I'm going to let them go and dig deeper, explore with this initial sort of understanding or whatever. Dan Schwartz and John Bransford had this great paper called A Time for Telling. And of course, in their case, they were showing how students that did more exploration, initially guided exploration, learned better when the explanation was offered than the ones that were first given the explanation and then told to explore. It's a matter of higher ed folks being aware of all of this and aware of all of this pedagogy. It's as if it doesn't apply to them. How to teach only applies to K-12, doesn't apply to higher ed. It's bizarre when you think about it.
Right. And one of the other advices that I give for anybody going into any subject within education is read outside of your field. And so there's like this like silo of like, oh, well, I can only look at education if it's CS education research. And it's like, well, no, like look at physical education, look at the arts, look at social studies, like find other ways that they're doing things and try and incorporate it and learn from it.
I think that is so important. And I feel that that is why this is not a plug or a, rara banner for the learning sciences. But, we read as part of our learning sciences training, we read so much of the research done in learning in general, But learning in general is always set in some context or another, right? Paper that you're reading, it may have been in an informal or a formal context. It could have been a mathematics learning or a science learning. You're always learning about something. Then we come into CS Ed research, and you sort of, have this multiple perspectives of different things that have worked in different contexts. And, not everything is applicable, but you sort of are able to bring that. I find that in CS Ed research, and perhaps this is true of folks that just stay within a discipline always, is that they lack that broader perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I was initially, when I first started going into CS education, just afraid that like I would be lacking the background and the context and whatnot. But I feel like because I came from such a different perspective, I'm able to kind of look at it from a new lens that other people aren't thinking of. And it's sometimes an advantage.
Oh, absolutely. I can completely see that. It's an advantage. You're basically bringing new perspectives and innovations to the fields.
This excerpt of the CSK8 podcast is from episode number 41, which is titled Discussing Computer Science in K-12 with Shuchi Grover. You can listen to this full episode, as well as hundreds more, by simply searching for the CSK8 podcast or by going to jaredoleary.com.